Okay, thank you everybody for joining. I just wanted to give a reminder that if you are joining, the call will be on mute when you first join. We will be having question and answer session at the end, and we would appreciate during the session if you would keep yourself on mute to avoid any background noise. We will be getting started momentarily as soon as Tim is ready to begin. Thanks.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Tim Singleton from Achievement Solutions, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending this training session entitled Addressing Unique Business Requirements and Automating Key Processes Utilizing the SAP Business One Queries. Today's session will be conducted by Daryl Goodman. Daryl Goodman has about 10 plus years directly with SAP Business One, both from a functional and from a technical perspective. Let's go to that next slide, Daryl. Okay, so looking at the objective of today's training session, it's really to provide attendees a base understanding of the SAP Business One databases, how to access information from those databases, and the related queries that SAP has, the query tools that SAP has to access that specific data so that it can be utilized in things like reports, alerts, dashboards, and numerous other areas to address unique business requirements and automate processes that may not be standard features within SAP Business One. So why is understanding the Business One query so important? Well, as Business One users, you're probably very familiar that SAP has a lot of useful information that can help your organization make faster, more informed decisions, but that information is not always available on a report or in an inquiry, but you know that information resides within Business One. And you may be familiar to some degree with the query tools within Business One, but maybe haven't accessed them before, and you don't really know how to get that information so that you can turn around and use it in useful ways. So the objective of today is to train you on those features, and once you have a good understanding of the queries, what you can then do with those queries in numerous areas throughout the software. We'll be covering standard SAP Business One queries, standard SAP Business One modules, as well as where we have used the SAP queries to enhance certain features and add some functionality to our Resolve modules for Business One to further enhance those processes. So with no further delay, I'm going to hand it back to Daryl. Daryl, thank you very much, and let's get started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. And so I want to start with just a brief overview of what we're going to cover in terms of an agenda today. I will be using the PowerPoint, with the idea of being able to introduce concepts, but then we'll toggle into the software. So we will move back and forth between the PowerPoint and the software as we go through the training. So we're going to start for understanding that people have different level of exposure to the query tools with an introduction to SAP Business One's query tools and concepts. So within that we'll look at the query wizard and generator and manager, and be able to understand how to be able to find the data inside of SAP Business One. At the conclusion of that lesson, we'll move into developing a digital assistant. And with a digital assistant, what we're talking about is how you can use the queries as the basis to make SAP Business One more proactive for you. So rather than you having to decide that you want to run a report or to enter certain data that's redundant or anything else along those lines, you can actually use the power of queries to be able to enhance the functionality, and make it so that it's working for you, and brings insight and relief to repetitive tasks. Then in lesson 3, we'll be able to use some of the custom dashboards and reports. Now, there are several different tools that are available. We're going to be demonstrating on a HANA system today. So our training will be looking at some of the HANA Kpis and dashboards, but there are additional tools available, that can be used within the SQL version of SAP Business One as well. And so all of the work that we're doing for the queries is able to be used within SQL. I'm just going to be working on a HANA system today. And then as we go into looking at some of the automation rules, we'll talk about how we could use queries to be able to help generate pick lists and being able to identify and understand which items should be picked and when, as well as looking at some advanced formulas in inventory replenishment. So how we know what to purchase, and we'll complete that with lesson 6, which will be an overview of working with the Resolve EDI and third-party logistics, which is what 3PL stands for, to be able to understand how you can manipulate your data and be able to make the process of exchanging data with outside parties easier using queries. So, again, as we start lesson 1 here, we're going to take a look at specifically how you can use the system information tool within inside of SAP Business One. And in addition to that, I also do want to point out that there's some very good documentation available, both from SAP and third parties. For the most part, I'm going to be focusing on the SAP provided content as well. But you can see here there's a link. We will be distributing the PowerPoint along with all the queries at the conclusion of the training. So you will be able to have access to this. But again, I do want to point out that you do have some very good documentation available, on the internet to help you with this, and we'll use that a little bit during our presentation. So specifically, we're going to take a look about how you can find the information inside of SAP Business One itself, and then we'll take a look at some of the documentation to be able to help further understand the relationships between data, again, using the help file, which can be, well, this is actually a link for online help, but the SDK help file can be installed from your SAP Business One installer. So if you've got your CD, if you're that old, or if not, your download, to be able to have those pieces. If not, you can reach out to whoever's responsible for your system to be able to make sure that you get the help package. As I mentioned, we'll talk about the Query Wizard. The Wizard is designed, as it says here, to be sort of an easy-to-use tool that guides you in the creation of queries. So again, the goal here is to be able to allow non-technical users to be able to understand and how to create some basic queries. The ability to write queries is something that you can start off very simply and get some very good data out of SAP Business One. There's a lot of data that SAP Business One captures that it doesn't necessarily make available on the screen. So if you don't have the queries or the reports, you're not actually accessing that data. So things like when was a customer created, or when was it last updated, or those kinds of things. A lot of that data is actually stored and available for you. You just need to know how to be able to extract that. And we'll take a look at some of those kinds of things as we work through the tool here. Now, the query generator, to me, I find to be something that is a little bit faster. And as we go through the process, we'll understand the differences between the two different tools. At the end of the day, they generate the same result, which is a query that can be saved and stored. And then, of course, the query manager is where you have the ability to see both queries that SAP has written for you in terms of system queries, as well as being able to have your own user queries that are stored and saved and can be then used inside of other functions inside of SAP Business One. So we'll take a look at that. And then this was just one slide too far. So let's go ahead and switch into SAP Business One now. I'm just going to try to pause the presentation here. Okay. And hopefully you'll see here that we've got the SAP Business One screen in front of you. And as we look at SAP Business One, one of the things that you can do is to go into any particular record. So let's say we wanted to go into the Business Partner Master. Okay. And I'll just click into the first record here. And I wanted to be able to find information about these fields. So one of the simplest things that you can actually do inside of SAP to be able to help you design queries or reports or other kinds of things is just simply go into the View menu here. And in your View menu, turn on this System Information. So if you turn on System Information, what will happen is down here at the bottom, you'll see here right now it says Form 0, Item 2, Pane, all that kind of stuff. And that is the area where we're going to see the system information. But if I do something like hover over the vendor number here, you can see that it gives you a lot more useful information. So now you can actually see that on the very bottom right of that string, it says OCRD, which is the table name. So we know that all the information about the business partner master is going to be stored on OCRD or possibly some related tables. And then it also gives you the field name. So here you can see the field name here being card code. It does give you some extra information there with respect to the form number, the item number, the pane, and those will come and become useful in something called a user-defined value, which formerly was known as a formatted search by SAP Business One. But for now, let's just go ahead and start simply and understand the concept of the tables and the names. So as I move to another field, you can see the table stayed the same. So it's still OCRD, but now we're in card name, and that's going to give you the ability to understand the difference between those two different fields. Now, inside of SAP Business One, there are some times where you're going to have related tables. So if I go and I hover over an address, for example, you can see because there is a many-to-one relationship, you can have as many addresses as you want associated with a vendor or a customer. SAP is going to store that data in a separate table. So you've got the parent record, which is the customer or vendor, in this case, the business partner. Or I guess technically a lead to be more precise, could be as well, but this one's a vendor. And therefore we have the ability to have an unlimited number of addresses. So you can see that one here is called a CRD1, which is a child table to the business partner master. Now, if you don't already know, SAP Business One does sort of follow that logic fairly consistently throughout the application. So you will see that you start with something, the header table being an O, and then the three letters, so CRD. And then after that, they'll be able to drop the leading O and start with numbering. So you'll be able to see when we look at a transaction. So if I open up a sales order, okay, I have a similar concept here where I have the header table, which is ORDR, for sales order. And then as I go down into the rows, you can see the rows actually have an RDR1. So that concept is something that you can use. It's not 100%. There are some things where they do not follow that convention. But as a general rule of thumb, if you know what the parent object is, the child objects will generally be the last three letters of that parent object plus the number to be able to allow you to continue. So that's one way to be able to understand the data inside of SAP Business One. Now, as you go through this, there are going to be some fields where when you hover over it, you're not going to get the table name, the field name. And so in that case, the reason for this is that this field, even though it looks like a field to us and it's on the screen and we can edit it, is not actually a single field. It's actually multiple fields. So it's being virtualized for us in the user interface, and that's because we have both the currency code, in this case a US dollar symbol, as well as the price. And so those are actually two separate fields that are being stored in the system, so that the one is just a numeric value that's storing the actual price, and the other is the currency code that's being used. And so to that end, you will be able to learn when we use that in formatted searches or user-defined values, how to be able to extract that, and I'll show that to you later. But there are going to be some times where you want to be able to understand the data structure in a different way. So one of the things that we have the ability to do is to use the SAP Business One SDK help. As I mentioned, this is a tool that comes for free with your SAP Business One installation. So when you installed your SAP Business One client, there were some other packages that were in that install file. One of them was the SDK, and if you install the SDK package, you can unchoose all the development tools, but just select the help. And this becomes a great tool. As you can see here, it's got a search box where you can simply search anything that you're interested in. And then what it will do is it will give you the field names, the description of the field names, as well as both the type and the size of the field. Now, when you do get to certain fields like the target type here, you can see it will actually give you a breakdown of the valid types. And so you can see here, you have the ability to link to a sales order, to a delivery, or to a AR invoice or an AR down payment. And so therefore, it's showing you, if we were to do that, what are the numbers that are associated with this? And again, a sales order could be based off of a document, and if it was, it would be a sales quotation. And so sometimes when you're querying a field, you'll see data that's not all that meaningful, like the 23. And if you don't know what that is, the SDK help is a great way to be able to come in and be able to say, oh, a 23 is a sales order. Now, again, as we look here, you can see we have both the price and the price currency as two separate fields that we talked about. Now, in addition, you'll also see that there are several different fields here that have blue hyperlinks. So, for example, the warehouse code, as you know, inside of SAP Business One, there's a warehouse setup, and that warehouse setup is stored on a different table. So if I wanted to be able to retrieve information about the warehouse code, I would need to join, which we'll talk about later, to the warehouse table. And so now it's telling me how to be able to know what the warehouse table is. And the nice thing about the help is that you can simply click into it and then be able to get a description and understanding of all the different fields that are associated with this. And of course, you can just navigate back to be able to get to the records. Then at the very bottom of the screen down here, it also shows you some primary keys. So you can see here what's the main thing that drives this table, and you can see the main thing that you would need to do if you were going to ever join or link to this table is to be able to use the doc entry and the line nub. Now, of course, there are other ways to do it as well, but these are some of the key fields here. And then if you wanted to be able to understand how it works with respect to linking back to a base document. So if I want to know how the sales order links to a sales quotation, I'm going to need these three fields here. So again, base entry, base type, and line type. So the SDK Help Center is a very useful tool in being able to understand and working with your data. Now, in addition to that, you also have, as I mentioned, the ability to go online. So if you haven't already used the website help.sap.com, I very much recommend it. It's a great repository of data. Once you get to help.sap.com, you can simply just type in what you're looking for. So if you just type in SAP Business One, you don't need to remember this whole huge URL. You can just simply remember help.sap.com, and then you'll be able to find the SAP Business One page. But within the SAP Business One page, there are a couple of other things that are very useful here. The ones that I'm going to point out today are going to be the online help, which we're going to look at next, as well as the list of how-to guides. And again, within the how-to guides, SAP has a very good document that talks about how to write queries, and it will include a lot of the information that we're talking today. In terms of the syntax of being able to extract data and how to use some of their tools. But once we get past lesson one, we'll start applying these tools, and that will be where we're going, a lot, above and beyond the documentation. But again, if you do go into the SAP Business One online help, you can see they've very usefully structured this with a menu that looks very much like the menu inside of SAP Business One. So you can kind of navigate to what you're looking for. And then as you can see in here, it's now going to give you information. So if you needed to understand what the different fields do and how that might impact your query, you have the ability to come in here and understand, okay, well, what is gross price and how is it calculated? And if you need to be able to repeat something like that in your query or to be able to modify something differently, again, you'll be able to do so and include or exclude data with a good understanding of the document. And then the last piece of documentation that I want to introduce, as I mentioned, this is page 17 of the document. I'll just scroll up to the top of the document so you can see this is the how-to guide for SAP Business One 9.3. They do update this from time to time. It's something that you can get publicly. So as you take a look at that, what you'll see is in this document, it gives you a section here specifically on writing queries. And in the writing queries section, you'll see that there's going to be some important distinctions between data that is in the system and data that is not in the system. So within this data, there's going to be data that's already posted. So the data that's already posted in the system, we can query. We can go directly to an ORDR or so on and so forth. However, there's going to be times where we're going to want to be able to pull data that is on the screen and hasn't been saved yet. So if I'm entering a sales order and I want to be able to pull some information, let's say from that customer record or whatever, I can't query directly from that. And so you'll see here there are going to be references. And then you can use this guide here to be able to understand some of the references. So the basic syntax is going to be $ and then either the field name, which we saw in the view, so the OCRD dot card code, or you can use this $bracket $, in which case you use those other numbers that I was talking about. So you'd be able to use the the 4.0.0 to be able to pull those kinds of records. So again, now that we've gone through the documentation and you understand where and how you can find this information, let's go ahead and move into the query wizard. Okay. And so I'm just going to go ahead and close all the extra screens here, and we'll see that you'll find your query wizard is going to be underneath tools and queries and then query wizard. Okay. Now, when you do open up the query wizard, again, as I mentioned, the concept of the query wizard is designed to be a tool that's going to guide somebody through creating a query. So as we click into it, here you can see on the steps here, it asks you to be able to choose the table. Now, again, if you know the table, you can simply type in the table. And again, we were able to find the table with the view system information. But if you don't know the table, one of the useful things that you can do is if you hit tab, just like you would on an item master, on a sales order for looking up the item code or whatever, you'll get your choose from list here. And in your choose from list, you have both the name and the description. So what I like to do is to come in here and to be able to find something. So if I wanted to be able to find all the tables related to sales orders, I might come in here and type in sales order and then hit filter. And that will bring just the sales order row, and you can see I was able to find that. Now, if I wanted to be able to find everything that had sales in it, I can go in here and do contains sales order. And now I'm able to see the all those related tables. So again, you can see I know all of these tables are related to the sales order. Now, when I write my queries, there's no one way to be able to write a query. But when I write my queries, I tend to like to start with the row. So what I'm going to do here is just go ahead and click on the sales order row. And the reason I like that is because when I choose the sales order row here, you can see it links me to some very useful tables. So now you can see tables that are related to the sales order are shown down here, and I can simply double click to be able to add the sales order header into the record. Okay, so now that I've selected the tables that I'm interested in here, we go into the next tab, and in the next tab, you'll be able to choose the columns that you want to include from the table. Now again, here it basically is where you would come in and select this. So what I'm going to do is go full screen because I think it just makes it a little bit easier here. And then there is actually a tool where you can do a view fit column width, and as we pick different fields, sometimes that's useful to be able to shrink. But again, here, what I'll be able to do is go into the list of fields, and now again, you can sort them by the field name if you've done the hover over, or you can sort them by the description if you're trying to look for the field. But in this case, what I want to be able to do is to search for card, which were some of the fields that we were looking for before. And we'll search by description instead. I apologize. So we'll come in here and just do customer. Okay. I'm just going to scroll. I do apologize about that. But in any case, what I'm looking to do is to be able to find, I apologize. The reason I'm not finding the fields is because I came in here and I forgot to change what I was looking for. So you can see I started on the sales order row, and because I was starting on the sales order row, I wasn't able to find the fields that I want because those fields are header fields. So it does help if you are selecting the right table. But as you can see in here, if I type in card, which was what I saw before, I have both card code and card name. You can multi-select your fields and then just be able to come in here and choose them. So now you can see so far I've asked for the records in terms of who the customer or vendor is. In this case, it's a sales order, so it's going to be a customer, and who what their name is. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to change this from sales order back to sales order rows. And now I want to be able to pull in some information about this. So again, I'm going to search for item. So I'll bring that in, and then we'll come down here and we'll also search for line total, which is also known as the row total. So this is going to give me a very basic report. What this will do basically is just give me a listing of all sales orders with a customer and their name, their code and name, as well as what item they bought and the total sales. However, we do have the ability to do some computation. So what we're going to do here is to first of all create a sort. So what I'd like to do is to be able to sort first by the customer, the name. So I'm going to come in here and say that's the first field that I want. And then after that, I want to be able to sort by the row total. So this is going to be sorting by customer name and then how much they bought. Now over here, you can see this is going to be smallest to largest. Typically for these kind of reports, I'd want to be able to see it in largest to smallest. So I want to see what items they bought the most of first. But because of the fact that we are just doing it like this is going to show me every single row over and over again. So if I want to be able to get a total by item, so I can see the total by item, what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to want to say that I want to do a sum. So I can come in here and I can do how many records were there, how many different items were there, the average, the minimum. But in this case, I just want to do a sum, which in the Query Wizard is called an amount. But if I was to try to continue with this, I'm going to get an error because once you do a computation, it now needs to know what to do with all of the rest of the fields that are not part of a computation. So that's going to be called something called grouping. So what I'm going to say is that I want to create a group here. And so now I have the ability to come in here and do the grouping. And so I will get the sum by item within the customer, and that will give me the total sales by item for the customer. Okay. So again, at this point we've talked about how we're going to do the sort type, what kind of math we want to do, which is what a computation is, and what we're going to do with the fields that are not part of math. All right. Basically, we're going to say that that's enough for us, and we'll go ahead and hit next. And it's going to bring us to a next step here where we can specify conditions. So conditions are essentially filters. And one of the things you can do in here is like Excel, you can use parentheses. So if you needed to be able to make something more complicated, you have the ability to do that. But what I want to do here is I'm just going to say I want the sales order to only be for the current year. And so as a result of it being only for the current year, I'm going to go ahead and choose the doc date, which is the posting date here. And then I'm going to say that I want it to be greater than or equal to. And since I am not choosing relation to another field, I'm just typing in. I'm going to come in here and say that I want it to be greater than or equal to the beginning of this year. Oops. Okay, and you can see that I now have my condition in here. And of course, you have the ability to put in additional conditions if you want to. But when you're done, it will show you the syntax of the query. And then you can go ahead and hit finish and you get your results. And so now you can see we've just successfully written our first query. And you can make it where you can drill in, you can see these different things. And so you have the amount here for the total. Okay, so what we can do is we can save this, and what you can do is in here, this is the ability to work with the query manager that we're looking at later. So you have the ability to come in here and manage your categories. So if I needed to be able to save this as a particular type of thing, I can come in here and do my queries. Okay, and then I can add that. And what that will do is it will list it into the list of things that you can choose. So my query is here. And then there are permissions that are associated with queries as well. So you can choose in your general authorizations who is going to be allowed for this. So we'll just go ahead and hit select all and then update this. All right, now that we've saved this, I've got my category. I'll save it in my query, and this will be Daryl. And we'll save that, okay? And now we have the ability to come and run that whenever we want. So that's the query wizard. Next, we're gonna move into the query generator, and I'll show you a little bit more complex query writing. And then we'll move into using some of these queries as we get into lesson 2, which will be coming up shortly thereafter. Okay, so again, in order to be able to open up the query generator, you're gonna go into tools and then queries and then query generator. Now you'll notice that the query generator user interface is a little bit different. So rather than having multiple steps that are walking you through the steps, you wind up with just this box here. And you also see that we have the ability to edit and directly work on the syntax in these boxes right away. So again, if you know the table name that you're looking for, you can just simply go ahead and edit it. Or again, you do have the same ability to come in here and do your choose from list. Since we're now in the generator, I'm going to go ahead and use some of the information that I already got with my hover over. And so what I'm going to do is we'll start with the ORDR. And then in this case, you can see here that it now shows me a list of different fields. Now, one of the nice things about this is that if you type in a related field, so in this case, I'm going to type in I typed in the header first and then the lines. You can see here that it automatically built what's called a join. A join is going to be the area where you tell your query how you want to be able to link data from separate tables. And so sometimes it's going to be very straightforward. Like here, you can see I want to join the rows of the sales order to the header of the sales order based off of its link. It's doc entry here, but sometimes you'll have more complex joins where you might be joining data that's not naturally related. Maybe you've got a user-defined field that's got a salesperson for like a salesperson 2, or something else along those lines. And so in that case, you're going to be able to come in here and edit your join and be able to change the relationship to be able to make one that SAP wouldn't normally know about. Now, one of the nice things about the query generator is that tables, fields that do have underlying tables are bolded. So one of the things that you can do is you can simply drag and drop the field over, and you can see that we'll go ahead and build the new join here. Now, unfortunately, for those of you that are using HANA, if you're using SQL, this is not a problem. But if you are using HANA, when you do the drag and drop method, it is basically still operating in the SQL mode, and HANA is case sensitive. So you will need to come in here and edit your join to be able to put in the quotes to be able to tell HANA that the field name is not to be all capitalized. So if you do use the drag and drop functionality, just be aware of that when you're using HANA. Okay. The next thing is that once you've joined a table, so again, we started with the order, we then joined the sales order, we've now joined the business partner. The reason that we might want to join the business partner table, the customer table in this case, is there might be some information that's stored on the customer that we want to include in our report that's not directly on the sales order. But sometimes inside of SAP, as we talked about earlier, there's going to be data that's not that meaningful. So if I wanted to know which customer group this customer belonged to, so I'm executing my sales orders, I could pull the data directly from the customer record, but it's unfortunately just going to be an internal number inside of SAP, and that's not typically useful to your people who are reading your query or your report. So in that case, it's often useful to be able to go ahead and drag another related table. So you can see I've gone from the sales order header to the customer record and now to the customer group field because I want to be able to choose the group name. And so I do apologize. I did mean to come in here and select some fields as we were going through, so I'll just go back and do that. So what we can do here is I can say from the sales order, I'm interested in the document number, also the document date, and we'll take the customer's code and the customer's name from the sales order. Now that I've got that, and I go to the lines, from the lines, I'm interested to know what item was sold. Again, I'm also interested in knowing the row total. So you can see here, I'm going to grab that, okay? And that's pretty much the query that we had before. But now we're going to go to the customer group, and with the customer group, we're going to now come in here and choose the group name, which is something that's more useful for us than the group code. Okay, and then finally, we'll come back here. And so once you've gone down this path, if you want to be able to choose something from the sales order again, you can simply click on the sales order. It will again load up the sales order table, and we can find additional related tables here. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab the shipping type, which is called transport code, and drag that over here. And once again, when I do that, you'll see here that I need to once again correct the joins. So we'll come in here and put in our quotes for the tables that I just recently added. And this is going to give me the opportunity to go back to the PowerPoint for a moment, because I do want to talk about the joins. So you'll see here that every time I added a table, you can see that SAP considered it an inner join. So let's understand a little bit more about what the joins are. So when you talk about joins, as I mentioned, it tells you how you link the data. But what you can think of it is an inner join, as you can see here, is basically where something has to be in both sets of data. So for example, if I wanted to be able to find the sales order rows that are associated with the sales order, it needs to be in both. Otherwise, I don't want all sales order rows. Okay, and then I may have a situation where I want to be able to join something optionally. So for example, it's possible to have a sales order that does not have a shipping type. You can leave the shipping type field blank. If I was to do an inner join on the shipping type table, what that's going to mean is that I would only get sales orders for the customer that had shipping types. Any other sales order that did not have a shipping type would be excluded from the results altogether. And so that's not something that we want to be able to do. So in this case, you could see I would typically want to use a left join or a left outer join. And those are, in my opinion, the most common queries that you're joins that you're going to use is the inner join, where I want to be able to be specific. I only want the sales rows that are associated with the sales order header, or left joins, where I want to be able to pull in data optionally if it's there. So a left join basically means if I'm starting from the universe of sales orders, which is this blue dot here, and then I bring in the universe of shipping types, okay, I want to keep all of the records that are from the sales orders, even if there's no corresponding data in the shipping types table. And so that's going to be a left join. Of course, there are additional joins that you can use as well. It's going to be a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm able to cover given the time that we have. So I did want to just bring this to your attention, where you can see the different types of joins and understand that there are joins. I was able to pull this from this website here. There's several good other websites that explain the concept of joins as well. And as I mentioned, you'll be getting this slide, so you'll be able to have both this graphic as well as being able to link to the source data. So now that we understand that, it's going to be important for me to be able to change or understand the different rules. So let's start from the top. So I have my sales order, and one of the things I like to do here is just to enter, because it makes it easier for me to be able to see everything. So I'm starting with my sales order, and then I'm joining to the sales order rows. And it makes sense to me that I want to use an inner join because I only want the rows that are associated with that sales order. Then you can see I joined the customer. Now, it won't hurt to change this to a left, but I know that every single sales order has to have a customer inside of SAP Business One. That's mandatory, so I can leave that one alone as well. Then I'm joining here to the customer group code. And again, you might want to change this one to a left. It won't hurt anything, but because every business partner record must have a customer group, it, again, won't hurt anything to be able to leave that alone. So we'll leave that one as an inner. And now I get to the OSHP table, and I get to a field that's optional. So this is where I really want to be able to come in here and change this to a left, and I used to use left outer join to be able to describe how I want the data to be able to come from the system. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we'll just go ahead and execute this. And you can see I now have a query similar to the query that we had within the query generator. Again, you can expand to be able to see the syntax. The little pencil here is useful sometimes if you want to be able to make some minor edits. It's useful to do it in the preview. Otherwise, you can hit cancel to be able to come back into the wizard. Again, what I want to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and save this one. So I'm going to do save as. It will then bring up my my queries here. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and save this one as sales analysis. Okay, and in my queries down here, you can see I have sales analysis queries. So this is the sales analysis where I've got my sales analysis by customer group. So I can just go ahead and I can type over this and save over it. It will overwrite the query, or I can give it a unique name. So if I want to come in here and call it sales analysis group 2, I can do that, and that will become a saved query. Now, if we cancel back into this, that's a very simple query, but now we have the ability to put in some additional things. So again, we have that where clause, which was the conditions in the wizard, the sort, which was the same concept, and then the group function to be able to work on that box. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put in a condition where I'm only interested in seeing closed sales orders. So I only want to see sales orders that have actually been finished. So we'll come in here and we'll go into our sales order table. And in the sales order table, you can see there's a field called doc status. Again, if I didn't know what field I was looking for, the easy way to be able to come in here and do that is to hover over the field, and it will tell me the field here for the doc status, or to look at the documentation. So I know, again, that there are different options in this. And so this field can be either open, or O, or closed, which is C. So if I was to do a filter like this, this is going to find only open sales orders, okay? And so you can see if I look at the number of results, there are a lot in this particular database here. So I've got 2016 rows versus if I change this to a C, so I'm only looking for the closed, which is what I want to be able to do. You can see here I'm going to wind up with a different record count. So I won't expand it, but you can see I'm already in the 5,000s. Okay, so the filters do change which data set that you want. Of course, if you leave the filter out, it will be all of them. Now, there are going to be some times where we want multiple conditions. And so you can see here, there's actually a button called conditions here. And in the conditions, what we can do is just expand this to make it a little bit bigger. You can actually come in here and use an and. So if I come in here and specify and, it allows me to be able to specify a new field. And so in this case, if I wanted to narrow it down to just a specific customer group, what I have the ability to come in here and do is to come in here and grab the customer group. Now, one of the things about the customer group is that I can say that I want it to match or not match or whatever, but let's just assume in this case I want it to be equal to. And at this point, I could hard code a particular customer group. So if I knew that I was interested in just one particular group and I wanted to use it for reporting, I would just type it in here. But there's also this concept of a variable. And the variables are pretty useful because it gives you the ability to not specify the value in the query, but rather to allow it to be executed and the user to be prompted. So now you can see the same exact query that we ran before, but I've added a second parameter or condition, and I put it in with a variable. So now you can see when I execute that, it now asks me which group name do I want. I get a very nice lookup here, and I can hit choose. And now it's only showing me records that match that criteria. So it had to be both closed and part of the distributors group. Okay. Of course, right now it's kind of like a little bit of a mess here. It's sorting by document number and those other kinds of things. So I can come back in here and decide that I want to do a sort. And if I want to create a sort, what I want to be able to do is I'm interested in seeing it by let's say item code first. So I want to see the sales by item. And then after the item code, I am interested in seeing it by, lost my place here, by customer. So I'll come in here and say that I want to find it by customer name. Okay, and now when I hit execute, again, I can come in here and choose distributors. You can see that it's now sorting first by item. So you can see the item number repeats. So I can see all the different customers that bought this item, and I can see then by customer. Okay. Now, if I do want to be able to do math inside the query generator, I'm still going to be able to do it, but I have to be able to do that myself manually. So one of the things that I'm going to do is to just go ahead and copy and paste everything that's in the select box up here, and just paste it into the group by box. And it's just a little trick that I use. There's other ways to be able to do this, but now what I want to do is I want to take out the fields that I'm not interested in grouping by. Because if I was to group by document number and document date, then it's going to basically always make sure that those records are unique, and I want to be able to get a total by customer of what we're spending. So I'm just going to delete those from the system altogether. I mean, from the group by box altogether. So now I'm saying, okay, I'm grouping by customer, and if I'm grouping by customer, their name is going to be unique. I'm interested in grouping by item, but I'm not interested in grouping by line total. And the reason I'm not interested in grouping by line total is the same kind of thing. I want to be able to summarize the line total. So once I've decided to summarize the line total, I can go ahead and just delete that as well. And as I mentioned, now what we're going to have to do is those fields that I deleted, we have to go ahead and put an operation on them. So as I put an operation on them, you can see I'm now grouping by unique fields here. I'm going to come into this box here, and I'm going to make the modifications to be able to put this in. So one of the things that we have the ability to do is to use an operation called max. And so what the max will do is it will give us the biggest sales order number. Now, since I'm giving it the biggest sales order number, I can come in here and I can specify a column name. So if I specify the column name, you are able to identify what this is to the user. So I'm just going to call this the last order number. Okay, and then as we presume into the document date field here, I need to be able to identify that as well. So I'm going to do max, and we're going to grab that thing. Now the as is actually a good habit because it makes it easy to label, but it is optional. So if I just hit space and then put my column descriptor before the comma, you'll be able to do that too. So I can come in here and say last order date. Okay, so I've now used the labels with and without the as, and finally I'm going to get to the field that I want to summarize. So I'm just going to come in here and do sum of the line total. And again, I'm going to give this a field label. So we'll come in here and just do total sales. So I'm going to click OK to that. You can see it put everything back into the box. I can execute this again. We'll choose distributors, okay? And you can see that I now have my, when it was last ordered, the date, the different products, the total sales. Now inside of a query, just so that you know, if you didn't already know, if you hold the control key and click on a column header, it will give you a summary. So you can see my total sales for this were 1.5 million or 1.499 million. And so that's kind of a useful thing to be able to get, in any of these queries. But again, perhaps I want to now be able to see which of my top selling items were. So I can come in here and use math in my sort. So the final thing that I'm going to come in here and do is to create the sum. So what we're going to do is first I want to be able to get let's make some mathematical fields that are just going to be useful in being able to derive additional data here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a field where we're going to count the number of records. So I'm going to go ahead and take this field here called the sum of total sales. Okay, and I'm just going to copy and paste this, okay? And instead of the sum, I'm going to use a different operation, and I'm going to use count, okay? And so this can now be called, let's say, times sold, okay? So I'm able to make another field, okay? And then what I want to be able to do is to create another field to be able to get the average sales. So the average sales would now be the sum of the sales. So we'll go ahead and we'll paste that here, and we'll just clean up the extra comma, okay? Divided by the count of the total sales. So we'll go ahead and we'll grab that here, and we'll put a divided sign and paste that in here as well. Now, again, I like to put in parentheses because it helps me be able to see visually what we have here. And I also need to delete these field labels because they're not needed as part of the math. Okay, so I've got my sum of sales divided by the count of sales. Okay, and then we're going to come in here and we're going to use this as average sales. Average sale. Okay, so once we've done that and we click OK, I want to be able to see everything sorted by the average sale. So we'll come in here and grab this here, okay, and then paste that into my sort box. Okay, and I'm just going to get rid of the record here. Okay, so if I go ahead and I hit execute on this again and we choose distributors, you can see here that I've now created some additional columns, and you can see here that this is now sorted by the average sale. Okay, but it's still sorting by customer, in group first. So what I can come in here and do is, if I want to change the sequence of this, you can simply grab the columns and move it around. So if I want to sort first by the average sale, okay, and then by item code and by customer, you can do that, and then it will change the sort order. Okay, so basically you can see we're almost done with this lesson, and then we're going to move into lesson 2. The last thing I want to show you is just being able to understand the ascending or descending. So again, this is in the wrong for the report. So I want to be able to come in here and just expand this to just be descending, and that will be our final part of this lesson. Okay, and I've got my query, and we'll go ahead and we'll save this as sales analysis. All right, so that's pretty useful stuff. We've just learned how to be able to create Query Wizard, Query Generator. The last tool, which we kind of talked about before, is just the Query Manager. And of course, within the Query Manager, I now have the opportunity to come in here and find my queries that I just saved and to run them. So anything that's in the sales analysis here, you can double click to execute on, and to be able to just run those queries after you save them. If you collapse this, it becomes more user-friendly for the users. And of course, you can export it to Excel or do anything else that you want to be able to do. There are a couple of other cool things that you can do within the Query Manager as well. So within the Query Manager, you can actually create a report. So if I come in here and let's take a look at one of the system reports here that you'll all have. And if I look at the system report for inventory value, for example, okay, you can see in here that you've got this report, but you see right now it's grayed out. There's no ability to print this. So one of the things that you can do is you can go ahead and click on Create Report, and this is going to create a simple report using the Print Layout Designer. So you can see there's a base template here. I can give it a name, or I can just use the default name. And as soon as I do that, I now have a print preview that will actually allow me to be able to see this data in a Crystal report, not a Crystal report, a PLD report format that you can use. In addition, you can edit them. I mean, you get your pencil and all those kinds of things. But in addition, you also have the ability to come in here and schedule a report. So I can come in here and specify, typing in my username and password that I want it to execute as, and I can have it specify that I want this report to be run. And it is able to do a basic email. So I'm able to come down here and just add recipients like you would in using the messaging system. So I can say I want it to come to me, and whether or not I want to be able to have it in my overview, or if I want it to be sent through SBO mailer as a PDF or whatever. But what this is going to give me the ability to do is to add this. And I got to put in my password. And then anything that you want in your overview is going to be here in your scheduled reports overview. And so you can see I'm able to come in and review my reports. And if they had actually executed, I'd be able to see the PDF or those other kinds of things as well. So that's the ability to schedule a report that you've saved inside of a query manager. So let's go ahead and move back into lesson 2. And in lesson 2, the purpose of what we're trying to achieve here is being able to develop a digital assistant. And again, the reason that we want a digital assistant is to be proactive in communications. And one of the great things is to be not only proactive with employees, but your customers, your vendors, or even, as it says, yourself. So you are able to make it so that it's more efficient for you to be able to do that. So in this particular case, we're going to go through a couple of different features inside of SAP Business One. So specifically the concept of UDVs, again, formerly known as formatted searches, the ability to use alerts, and the ability to use approvals. And then finally, we're going to use one of the Resolve modules, which is the Data Messenger module, which is part of the Resolve suite that's going to be able to extend functionality beyond some of the capabilities that SAP offers out of the box, but the concepts of the queries are the same. Now, the one thing that we're going to do here is this is now going to be a little bit more like a cooking show. I've already got all the queries defined, so I'm not going to write the queries again. I will take the time to explain some of the queries as we use them, but in order to be able to understand the business cases and so on, we'll just use those things. So let's take a look at some of the examples that we're going to be going over for. So first of all, one of the things we might want to do is to be able to improve our accuracy and reduce redundancy in doing order entry. And so you can see I have 2 examples that are associated here. For me, I do it all the time and I hate it. I'm entering a sales order and I always forget to fill in a delivery date. And so I get the red bar message, and that's something that a lot of customers will have a standard term that they want to be able to use for the delivery date, either the same day or maybe it's 2 days from now or whatever it's going to wind up being. So I'm going to show you how we can get that to be automatically populated. And then we'll use a little bit more complex example where we're going to pull some information from the screen to be able to set the dimensions, which are part of the cost accounting features of SAP Business One, to set those dimensions based on an item group code. All right, and then if we look again, what's the business purpose of what we're trying to accomplish? We want to be able to increase the customer service levels and rates. So I want to be able to find a salesperson. I want to find for my salespeople any customers that have not placed an order in the past 30 days. So typically, if I'm getting orders from somebody and all of a sudden I get a slowdown and I don't get an order from them in a month, I want my salesperson to reach out and say, hey, why? And try to be able to facilitate that. Same thing for being able to fulfill, stock. Just a simple one. And there's some of these ones are redundant. There's a built-in query that can do this, but I just wanted to show you an example of one that could be based on text. So we're going to look at items that are below their minimum order quantity. Finally, we'll take a look at being able to do things like, hey, I've placed a purchase order. I want to know when it comes in. Well, typically that's 2 separate people, right? So the person that places the purchase order is working inside the office, and you have a warehouse that's receiving the product in. And that's going to be a different user who's creating the GRPO. And so I want to be able to use the power of the queries to be able to get it to notify me that I have, in fact, successfully received my purchase order by somebody else that did it. So it won't show up in SAP's My Activities because I wasn't the person that created the GRPO, but we can still get notified. Using SAP's approvals, we'll be able to take a look at how we can make sure that we've ordered something properly. So if somebody modifies the payment terms from the what's specified on the customer, I want to be able to review that and decide whether or not I agree or don't agree with the change in terms. Or if someone is going to buy something from a vendor, maybe I've gone through a whole process through QC or otherwise to be able to pre-select vendors that are approved to sell me my products. As you know, SAP Business One does have preferred vendors, but it doesn't mandate that you buy from those preferred vendors. So you can buy any product from any vendor. Using this, it will give me the ability to have an approval. So if anyone places a purchase order with a vendor that's not on that approved list, it will stop the purchase order and go through the approval process. Finally, we'll take a look at understanding what we can do with vendor lead times. So if I have placed a purchase order, a lot of you are already using some of the built-in tools from SAP or third-party tools to be able to have that purchase order go directly to the vendor. And that's awesome because it just saves a step, and I totally agree with that. But how am I sure that the vendor actually got my PO if I'm not talking to somebody or giving them the PO or anything else along those lines? So one of the things that we can do is we can have the system automatically review to see whether or not we've gotten back an acknowledgement from the vendor, which we're going to use by using the vendor's reference number as the key. So if we don't have a vendor reference number after 2 days, we're going to go ahead and call the vendor and ask them to confirm or send them an email, whatever it's going to be able, in this case, it'll be an email to ask them to confirm why they haven't given us the confirmation, and just to be able to ensure that our purchase order will actually be accepted and delivered on time. And then finally, some simple things that you've probably seen and gotten used to as a consumer, but there's no reason that you can't do this from your ERP system as well to your customers. So as soon as you place an order online, a lot of the times you get an email with your order. We call that a sales order acknowledgement. So how you can send that by email. And then when the product ships, they've signed up with their mobile number. You want to send them a text message, so you can send them a text message out of the system to be able to say your product is shipped and give them the tracking number and those kinds of things. Okay, so what's going to wind up happening here is, again, for the purpose of providing this data to you, I will have a slide that's going to identify each one of those examples and to give you the concept of what the actual syntax is. So you can take these queries and directly implement them. What I am not going to do is I'm not going to go through each one of these in PowerPoint slide. I just think that would be boring. So we will basically just skip on the slides to lesson 3, but what I'll do is to just come inside of SAP Business One and sort of walk you through the different features. Okay, so within the first one we talked about here, again, I'm going to open up my sales order. And once I open up my sales order, I'm just going to go ahead and go to a new one here, and I'll enter in my center port. Okay, and now you'll see here that as soon as I entered in center port, it automatically populated the delivery date, and the delivery date was 3 days greater than the posting date or today's date. Now you'll know that there's a user-defined value or formatted search based off of this indicator here. So this little magnifying glass tells me that this field is being updated by a query. And again, if you don't see that in your system, what you want to be able to do is go into View, Pickers Display, and then turn on the indicator here for user-defined values. So now how did I get this to work? Well, if you go into the tools and then go into your customization tools, and you go into your user-defined value setup, which you can also do with your Shift-Alt F2. It will bring up a screen here, and you can do this for any field on the system, where I can either say I want it to be normal without a search, or I can define data, or I can have it run a query. And so if I do run a query, you'll see it opens up my query manager here, and I'm able to come in here and see the different queries that are on the system. Okay. Now, if I go into my query manager, you'll see here that I've created a user-defined values or formatted searches category here, and you can see that that query that I've chosen is plus 3 days. And so if I execute on this, this is one of the things that I referenced in the documentation. And in that documentation, I specified that it is going to be able to pull from the screen. So within, sorry for the pop-up, within the screen here, the reason is this sales order hasn't been added yet, so I can't go query ORDR to be able to get this document date. So I am saying that I want to add a number of days, and the number of days that I want to add is 3, and I am pulling it from the screen. So I use this $ bracket $ 10.0.date, and again, that syntax for you is in documentation. Now, the reason it says from dummy is because I'm not pulling it from any table. I'm just pulling it from a screen. This is something that's required for HANA. It's not required for SQL, but either way, you'll be able to come in here and use the syntax to be able to pull from that screen. So again, if I hover over this field here for posting date, you can see it says form 139, item 10, pane 0. So that's where the 10.0 came from. And then the fact that this one was a date was where I was able to come in here and get the date. So you can see that that now is populated. Okay. And then similarly, I was able to come in here and specify another query. So if I come in here and I grab my dustpan, for example, Okay, you can see here that it automatically filled in my dimension. And again, you can see concept is the same here. So if I use my Shift Alt F2, you can see I was able to run a query. And this query here is going to be based off of the item group. Okay, and so if we once again take a look at our query manager, and I accidentally closed it, so I'll just open it again. In the query manager, we go down to our queries. You can see this query is a little bit more complicated than the last one, not overly complicated, but here you can see I was able to do a case statement. A case statement is a type of query where it's sort of like if you ever used an Excel if, or something else along those lines. What I'm doing is basically saying that I want to select from the item table, okay, the item group, and what I'm doing is I'm passing the item code from the screen. So here you can see the 38.1.0 is from the screen, and I've passed that through, but I have now joined the other tables, and I was able to come in here and say, okay, when it's item group 100, I want it to be this dimension. When it's item group 110, and otherwise I want it to be this last one. So now I've really just made my order entry much more efficient. All I have to do is enter my customer, enter in my item, and the rules that I have for being able to make sure that I properly cost things are all going to be just automated here, as well as being able to follow my my rules for the due dates. Okay. So that's the first part of using a digital assistant, is just being able to understand the user-defined values and the power that they have to be able to retrieve data from things that are off screen, to be able to bring data together and help you select those kinds of rows. All right, so what we can do is just go ahead and cancel out of the sales order, and let's go ahead and take a look at alerts. Now within alerts, okay, you can see here underneath administration, you're going to have this tool here called alerts management. And alerts management is a pretty cool tool. And what that's going to give you the ability to do is to use some predefined alerts that you guys know about already, where you've got these gross profit deviations and so on and so forth. But you also have the ability to create one with what's called the query here. So if I come in here and I activate this and I do based on the query, you can see here that I'm able to specify how frequently I want this to run, whether or not I want to save the history, and whether or not I want it to go internally or by email. So you can see here right now I have it set to do an internal message. And let's go ahead and take a look at this query. Now, this particular query, okay, is showing me that I do have some stuff that I've received. And so you can see you can write whatever you want for the context of the report. So and you can see I am getting my notifications. You can write whatever you want for the context of the report here, and I'm able to specify where I'm pulling it from. So the PDN is the delivery table, actually the rows of delivery table. And from the PDN, I was using the link back to the purchase order. So I'm interested in goods receipt POs that came from purchase orders. And again, if you remember when we talked about the SDK help, it told me how to be able to go back to the base object. And I used the base type, the base entry, and the base line. So that brings me back to the purchase order. Then from the purchase order rows, I was able to join back to the purchase order header. Okay. And then here I also wanted to pull something from the goods receipt PO header. So you can see I've got my goods receipt PO header, so I can see what products were received, the quantity that were received, which vendor we received them from, and which PO number. Now, the reason that this is useful here is because I specified I wanted to know who created the PO. So inside of SAP Business One, if you go into your query generator here and we take a look at OPOR, which was my table, okay, you can see that there is a field that you don't normally see on the screen, although you can see it in changelog. But basically it's called user sign. So here you can see user sign, okay? So this is where SAP is storing who created the purchase order. Now you notice it's bold. So the reason it's bold is because it's actually linking to the OUSR table. So within the user table in the system, everybody that logs in, even though I log in as Daryl into the system, I actually have a number associated with that. So what I've done is I came in here and I said, when these people enter in a purchase order, I want them to be able to get it. And then in order to be able to make it so that I don't get notified all the time about all of my existing GRPOs, I went in here and put in some filters. So I said it had to be created today, and the timestamp needed to be that it was created within the past. And you have the ability to come in here and configure whatever it is that you want to configure as your time using the timestamp. So again, more fields that are available for you inside of SAP Business One: the create date and the timestamp. Those are things that are in there and can be used as part of your query. And then what this will do is when it executes, you can see I'll be able to get my message. So here you can see it shows me a list of all of the purchase orders that were received. And so this way, even though somebody else did the receiving, I'm able to come in and to be notified of that. Okay. So that's one example where we can go ahead and we can take a look at that. Now let's go ahead and take a look at one. Let's go ahead and take a look at one where we want to look at the customer. Okay, so this one here, you can see I have this one running just every day at 10 a.m. So rather than having it run constantly, I'm having it notify me of this. Okay, and so again, you can see at 10 a.m. I did get this notification, and this notification here is showing me a list of all of the customers, what their lifetime sales were, and the last time that they ordered. Okay, and so this was just like a lot of the other queries that we wrote earlier, and we can go ahead and take a look at the query. So within the alerts, if I want to find my queries that are in there, again, I was able to select whatever I wanted. But in order to be able to make it be the last 30 days, you can see here in my from box, I specified where the document date is greater than, and then I did add days to today's date, which is current date, minus 30. So I went backwards using the add date feature. And because I was interested in being able to get their lifetime sales, you can see I have, again, just like we did early in the example, where I'm doing a summary of my sales and the last time that they ordered with the max. So you can see, again, how that example that we used earlier when we were building the query can become very practical for things like this. Now, of course, you could be more complex with this. You could, say that if they haven't ordered in a year, we want to drop them off this report. And maybe put that on a different report, because this should be just a tickler for people to be able to follow up with, recently active customers or whatever. So you can increase this logic to be as meaningful as you need, and to be able to trigger to specific customers, specific salespeople for their customer, or just generically to your sales manager, or however you want to be able to use that. Okay. And then the last one here was just being able to look to see whether or not there were any products at all that were below the MRP. So here you can see I use the concept called distinct. There might be one item that's below inventory. There might be 50 items that are below inventory. In any case, I need to run the Mrp Wizard. So rather than getting notified for every single product that's below stock, it doesn't matter. I'm going to run the Mrp Wizard. Giving me distinct means that I'm only going to get one result for this query, because I'm only selecting some specific text. Now here you can see I typed in what I wanted to be able to get, which is the message that I want to send to somebody. Okay. And then here's the criteria that we used to be able to identify that. So you can see here we went in and we said the on hand, plus on order minus committed is, and if null is useful, because if you didn't specify a minimum on the item master, we want to be able to recognize that. So what I'm saying is if the item record does not already have a value, I'm going to substitute the blank for 0. So it will be the same as if you entered a minimum quantity of 0, and I'm looking for it to be below 0, and that will trigger the alert. Now, another cool place that you can use alerts, queries, is going to be in the approvals. So here again, you can see we're going to use the approval templates. And so what I'm going to look at here is if I execute this one here where I want to see the payment terms, you'll notice that I do get a red bar message. This query could not be executed. And the reason it can't be executed is because you can see I had to use, by definition, it's an approval on a transaction. I had to use the referential link like we used for the UDVs in the query. So if I'm not on a sales order, it can't run. Okay, so one of the things that you can do if you want to be able to troubleshoot or verify that the queries work is instead of using the query manager, if you open up a form, so in this case the sales order form, and you go to Tools, and then your Queries and User Queries, you can navigate the user queries from this main menu. And if I go into the approvals, you can see here, oh, I want to see whether or not this would fail approval or not. I can go ahead and I can execute it that way. And you'll see that it did not fail approval, because in this case, the sales order did, in fact, have the right conditions. So when you run a query from that menu, it will automatically replace the values with the customer. So you can see here, I've got the customer code and whatever their group is, for the terms. Okay, so that's just a nice little tip for being able to do troubleshooting. But if you want to be able to see how the approvals work, again, if I come in here and enter a sales order for Centerport, and I grab a dustpan, okay, if I come into my accounting tab here and I change this from 2% 10 net 30 to, let's say, net 60, okay, when I go ahead and I hit add on this, it's going to stop and prompt me for the approval. And so we'll look at the approval templates and stages just briefly on this. Again, there is separate training that you can have from SAP on how to use approvals, but okay. So in here you can see it did fail approval, okay, and now it will, of course, go through the approval process inside of SAP. So that was that query. Here's the other query that we want to take a look at here, where you can see, in this case, I wanted to find the vendors that are not the preferred PO. So again, you can see I had to do select distinct true, which is what you do for an approval query, because you're just looking for it to be a true or a false. So if the condition that you want to test for happens, you want it to be true. Otherwise, you want to return no results. So in this case, I specified from the purchase order where the vendor, which is what this piece is here, again, the 4.0.0 is the card code from the purchase order header, is not in. And then I selected the vendor code, which is the table in ITM2, which is, again, if I was to go into an item master and do the view system information, that's where SAP is storing the preferred vendors. But I needed to be able to tell the system which item I'm interested in looking at. So you can see here, I passed through the item code from the row. So you can see here, I've got the 38.1.0 in the row. So what we'll do here is just to quickly go into the approvals. Okay, and if we take a look at the approval stages, you can see that I do in fact have my two templates turned on. Okay, so here is the payment terms check on the sales order. I can say when I created a sales order, and here's where it is. Here's where it needs to be approved. And what I did was, instead of using one of these built-in terms, I was able to come down here and put in a query, and this can be any query that I wanted to run. And actually, you can have it run multiple queries. So if I wanted to run multiple checks, you can have it run multiple checks. Typically, we see people use just one query per approval and just have multiple approvals, because you can have different people who are responsible for approving. But in any case, you can see how that one worked. Okay. And then we've got the same thing for being able to find the vendor check. Okay, where again in my terms you can see it's not part of the preferred vendors. And now if we were to go into a purchase order, okay, and I'm going to go ahead and grab from Far East Imports, and we're going to go ahead and order my dustpan and squeegee. And if I drill into these items, okay, you can see that my preferred vendor here, which if I was only interested in having one vendor, I would not have need to join to a subtable, because you can see I can pull this vendor code directly from, if you look down here, directly from the OITM.card code. But if I go into this subtable, this is where I might have multiples. And so this is where, again, you can see that ITM2.vendor code existed. And so now when I go ahead and I add this here, you'll see that it did fail that vendor check. And so I can say, please approve or whatever, and it will put that purchase order on hold. So that is, again, using approvals as part of the process for your digital assistant. Okay. Next, let's talk about some automation where we might want to work outside the system. To that end, we have the ability to come in here and take a look at wanting to be able to notify our vendor when the purchase order is older than 2 days old, okay? So what we've done here is to create a data messenger record. Now, again, if you've never seen data messenger, I'm just going to kind of just introduce it extremely briefly. Again, we're happy to show you data messenger. If you're interested, please do contact and follow up. But the concept behind data messenger is it is a tool that allows us to be able to run based on the existence of a record from a query or the existence of a transaction. That's going to be able to follow rules. So you can see here, I can follow holidays, and allows us to be able to send text messages, to be able to send emails, or to be able to send files, via FTP. And then the idea behind it is that, and there's some other things that are in here as well, but I can go in here and I can run a schedule. So you can see I have this set to run every day, and I'm telling it to run a saved SAP Business One query. So if we take a look at the query manager, again, you can see in my DM queries, I've got the POs older than 2 days. So it's just a standard SAP Business One query, created and saved just like we did with everything else, okay? But I've now put it into this messaging platform. And one of the reasons that we want to do this as opposed to using an alert, because you can actually send an email out to a vendor from the alert system. But one of the problems with it is that you need to make an alert for each individual vendor in that case, because otherwise you'll be sending the messages to all of your vendors if you go and you do that. Because the alerts, when you write the query, you have to save the query, who you want to identify to, and select the recipient. In our case, we're going to be able to have a dynamic recipient. So what you can see is I want to consolidate this email by vendor. So I'm picking a field from my query. In this case, I've chosen vendor, which is the vendor code. And I said I want to send an email grouped by each vendor. And then who do I want to send it to? Instead of being just a list of users or going in and doing add recipients or a distribution group inside of SAP. Thank you so much. So instead of having to send it to a distribution group and making an individual alert or query, you have the ability to come in here and to send it to the email address that's associated with the business partner, or if I had specified a specific user or a sales employee, or even an other, which allows me to be able to choose. So if I do choose other, for example, I can come in here and choose a mobile phone or an email address from any user-defined field or table. Okay. You can also send it specifically to email groups and distribution groups that exist within SAP Business One, and you have conditions that you can use. So what I'm able to do is to write a simple query that just finds all the conditions, but then what I can do is I can actually create an advanced condition in here where if I wanted to be able to say that the ship date needed to be greater than or equal to a specific value or something else like that, I can send the message to one person. But if the entered by is whatever, I can send it to a different person. So you can actually create different rules based on the different fields as to who's going to get messaged and what method they're going to get messaged. So again, internally inside of SAP, by email or by text message, or you can have a print or fax as well. Okay. But the key here is how do we use the query to be able to enhance the data? And so besides being able to make it more efficient by being able to group and use dynamic recipients, we're also able to build a dynamic message. And so here you can see I was able to come in here and insert things like the document number into the PO subject. And when I created a message, I was able to address them. So I was able to say dear and what the vendor's name is. And again, I was able to just pick the fields from here. We're requesting information on our purchase order. Here is the date of the purchase order. And then this one here, you can send it as a plain text email or as an HTML email. The reason we did this one as an HTML is it just makes it nicer for the vendor. So when they get the email, it will look like this. So you can see it substitutes the name dynamically from the query. So you can say, dear CTI Computers, please follow up with the purchase order that was sent. And of course, this one's a test system, so it's very old. But we wanted to be able to follow up on these products. And then we're able to tell them who entered it and who to contact and the name of our company and so on and so forth. So this is an example of being able to be proactive. And so the way that this query worked again, was all we were looking for was a very simple condition in here. So we were looking for in the where clause here that the document date needed to be 2 days old, and that the NumAt card, which is what they call vendor reference number, that's the field number for vendor reference number, was blank. Okay, so if it met those two conditions, we wanted to be able to follow up and have it be sent to an external user, in this case the vendor, to be able to contact them. Okay. As another example, we talked about being able to do some of those customer-facing ones. So if we take a look at the next message in here, you can see that this message is geared towards the customer. And so rather than using a saved message, I was able to write a query in here. We can write the query in Query Messenger and Query Designer and Query Generator, and then copy and paste it in here, or you could just freeform it, or there's a couple of other tools that you can write it. But the key one here was, just like we did on the user-defined searches, I joined the document entry to a variable here, just like you would in Crystal Reports, called doc_key. And so you can see this one, rather than running on a query, is being run on a transactional, but it's still using the query to be able to do the data. Again, you can see here the recipients, who I want to contact for this. But when we do the email, it's the same kind of thing, but this one can be formatted to be prettier so that it can be, customer facing. So you have the ability to come in here and to send them information about what products they bought, as well as being able to identify, the freight and total and those kinds of things. Now, one thing that's very common when you're sending emails is if you have something like a discount, in order for them to be able to understand what the discount is, you need to be able to include it. But if you send out an email to everybody with a discount field, your customers might start asking you for a discount. So one of the things that we've built into this, and again, being able to use the concept of a query within a query, was to be able to use a suppress function. So here you can see I said, in the event that the discount is equal to 0, I want to suppress this entire section. So when you notice that there was when we did the preview here, there was no field for discount, okay? And that's because this particular order didn't have a discount. But if it did have a discount, it would have actually showed another column here for the discount and the discount total. So this is just another example of where you can use queries to be able to use conditional formatting in being able to send your messages as well. So what I want to be able to do is just go back into the database that we're in before, and we'll take a look at one more, which is the text messaging. So under our data messenger and DM master. And in our DM master here, just going to go ahead and bring up message number 2. And this is going to bring up the send the tracking number. So again, here, all I'm doing is selecting the tracking number whenever I find from the delivery. Okay, but for our messages here, we wanted to keep it simple. So you can see this is a very simple message. Dear, the person's name, your sales order number is shipped. Here's the tracking number. Of course, you could have embedded this tracking number with a hyperlink if you wanted to, but a lot of the mobile phones do that for you automatically at this point now. And this is in reference to your PO number, and thank you for your business. So again, you can see you're able to use this tool to be able to give a similar experience to your customers, whether they're B2B or B2C, as they might be expecting when they shop on Amazon or something else along those lines. So the next section that we had in lesson 2, the next section that we had was lesson 3, and let's just quickly hop into the PowerPoint here and see what we're going to cover in lesson 3. Is to be able to understand using some of the queries in reports and dashboards within inside of SAP Business One. So again, there are several tools that can be utilized. There's Crystal Reports. There is Interactive Analysis, which is an Excel-based tool, as well as Pervasive Analytics and the Resolve Query and Report Launcher. What we're going to be covering today is going to be the Pervasive Analytics and the Query and Report Launcher, because those are inside of SAP Business One. But again, you can definitely use queries as the basis for Crystal Reports and being able to send them out as well. Okay, so again here, we're going to take a look at being able to get items that have no committed quantity. Committed quantity in SAP means that there's nobody asking for it. So there's nobody using it in a production order. There's nobody using it in a sales order. So why would I want to hold this inventory if I've really got none of it? I should maybe make a sale or just something else along those lines. So that would be, why would we be able to do that? And as being able to plan for our labor and making sure that we have space, we have the ability to use a container management module of Resolve, but it really doesn't matter what the data is. In this case, we were just seeing that, in our system, we're tracking the containers that are coming in from overseas, and I know what date they're arriving. So I'm going to build an identifier to be able to know which containers are arriving this month and how many are coming in. And when I do this month, it could have been anything. So it could have been this day, this week, whatever I wanted to be able to use. We can also use the queries that we built earlier to develop KPIs that we can put onto our screen or onto our dashboard. So in this case, we can look at the analysis or to be able to help us during our data entry. So for example, if I need to be able to make a fast decision, so I'm entering in a sales order and I want to know how is this order shipped in the past, so I can quickly get the appropriate freight quote to them or whatever it's going to be. You can use that information. Or if I want to find out, is there a heavy return history, customers calling up and they're complaining about an item or something else like that, I can go ahead and take a look at some of those return histories. So again, you'll have access to each of these queries, and we'll come back to the PowerPoint for the introduction to lesson 4. But let's go ahead and start by taking a look at what's called a count widget. So first of all, we've gone ahead and we've built a query. And in the query manager here, you can see I've got my widgets and I've got my different queries that are associated with the widgets. Okay, so I've got my items with no commitment. And again, you can see this is basically just selecting some data simply from the item master where the committed is equal to 0. And then I went ahead and I sorted it by on hand. So you can see this is my worst defending items. These are stuff that I'm holding a lot of and can't sell. Okay. So in order to be able to use this, I came in and I went into tools. And then within the tools, I came into cockpit and then count widget. And what I did in the count widget here was to put a widget here where I've got the no commit. I created it here, specified the query, okay, and that's going to create the count widget. And then you can see I did the same thing with the containers arriving. But the reason I wanted to do this was to be able to show you that you can use user-defined fields and tables in your queries. So if you've got something from a third party or maybe from us or just something that you've added as a user-defined field or table, you can use the same concept here to be able to identify this. So you can see I'm now able to find the containers that arrived, okay? And again, you went and I was able to assign that to a count widget. Now, once you assign it to a count widget, you can see here, you can come into your cockpit and manage your cockpit to be able to add the widgets. And I've already done that here for the containers arriving this month. So you can see it shows me that I have 6 containers arriving this month. And if I click on it, it'll execute the query where I'm able to come in here and see the details. And this is whatever I chose to include within that. So this is really useful because you can use pretty much any table that you want or anything that you want to be able to measure. So you can see I was able to come in and be able to get a counter the same way that SAP provided the ones called My Open AR Invoices or My Sales Orders Not Delivered. These were from SAP, but I was able to add my own that are based on my own logic. Okay. Now, within Pervasive Analytics, I was able to go ahead and build this KPI. And so you can see here, I've got my average sales this quarter, what my goal is, what my trend is compared, and all that information. So let's take a quick look and see how that worked. And again, I came into Pervasive Analytics. Okay. And I have an existing one that I already built, but I'll just build a new one quickly here for you for the KPIs. And what you can see is that all of my user-defined queries show up here. So that sales analysis query that we created before, where I've got my sales analysis or my group by customer or whatever it's going to wind up being. So what I can do is I can expand this and it will show me the list of the things that are in here. So I wanted to be able to take something like the line total, okay, and drag it here. All right. Now you notice again, it gives me the ability to do the sum or the average. And so you can see here, it's starting to show me the values already. But then what I can do is I can drag something like the document date, and I could say this year, or I could say this month. Okay. And when I do that, it will automatically redefine this. Finally, I can come in here and give it a goal. So I want, I don't know, 2,000, and we want to do increase sales goal. Okay, and then finally for this trend, you see here I have the ability to come in here and see how did I do over last month, or how did I do over the same month in the last year. So those are some of those things, and of course you can build more advanced trends as well. There is documentation available on using your KPI designers, but the key here was that using a query that we already built and saved, and we might be using for other functions, is going to give us the ability to come in here and then be able to build a KPI that we can save and oh, I forgot to give it a name. So this will be sales, monthly sales. Okay, and we can go ahead and save this. Anyway, I'll just come back and show you the one that I already saved because I gave it a good name last time. But you can see in here I've got my, here's one that I did for rental revenue. You know, it's the same kind of concept. So I was able to come in here and pick my rental queries and be able to save those things, and I was able to type it in and save it. It was probably the KPI goal that was too long. So in any case, that's a KPI. So those KPIs give you a number that you can put on the screen. The other thing that you can do is you can build dashboards. So if I come in here and I take a look at the sales analysis dashboard, okay, you can see it's the same concept here. So what I do is I come in here and I'm able to search for the data source. So you can see I have all of my user-defined queries, you know, where I was able to come in here and say I wanted a sales analysis query, and you can see I used the one that I built earlier. And I dragged and I dropped this over, and you can see I was able to say I want the line, but now I want to be able to see it by group. So I'm able to get a visualization. So if you look at the raw data, you can see where that's coming from. But I'm able to get a nice visualization here, you know, by customer group. So I'm able to take some component of this and then be able to use the different visualization structures. So this is a really good way to be able to extend the cockpit. But one other nice thing that's useful about this is you do have the ability to create an action. And so what this would give me the ability to do is if I wanted to link this to another sidebar inside of SAP, I could specify what I want to link it to. So I could link it to an item code. And if I linked it to the item code, what that's going to give it the ability to do is when I drill into an item and I look at the item, I'm able to get this same report now filtered down by that item, so I can see which customer groups are buying and what volume they're doing in buying my products. So you can really extend the logic that SAP is giving you, you know, via the pervasive analytics. Now, one of the other things that we've done here is if I go back and I take a look at my sales order here, and I'll just pull up an existing sales order. So let me go to, okay, so here's a sales order. I've got some products for this customer, and you can see I'm able to right click, and there's a function here called Query Launcher. Within Query Launcher, this is going to give me the ability to run queries. Now, we already talked about the fact that I could have a user-defined value query against the sales order. But what this gives me the ability to do is to come in here and write a query where I'm able to pass in multiple pieces of information. So here you can see I want to see who the customer was and what the ship to was and what the item code is. So based on that, you can see all I was able to do is right click and I say, how does this item ship? And here you can see it normally ships by FedEx if I need it by early morning. Otherwise, it's by UPS 2-day. And that's all based on dynamically. I didn't have to set up this data or anything else like that. It's reading from this past sales orders to be able to find out how this customer and this ship to have previously shipped this particular order. So again, you can extend your business logic that way. And then similarly, we had the ability to come in and look at unrelated data. So here, if I wanted to be able to see, okay, for all customers who have returned this product, when did they return it, the last time we returned it, you know, what the return reasons or actions were, or so on and so forth. And again, that query here was just passing through the item code information. So that came from a tool that we call Query Launcher. And in the Query Launcher, you have the ability to come in and link those queries to your forms. And then what we're going to do is go to lesson 4 after this. But you can see I was able to come in here and just link the queries to the forms, or you can link queries to the main menu as well. So that's sort of a useful tool. All right, and then just switching back to lesson 4 here, we want to use similar kind of logic now to be able to use a tool called Advanced Allocations inside of Resolve to be able to work with the SAP Business One pick lists and create them on an automated basis. Okay, so again, what we'll do here is we're going to look at Resolve Advanced Allocations. And what you can see here is that it gives me the ability to build several rules associated with the how I want my pick tickets to be released. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at, let's say, the Amazon orders. Okay, and within the Amazon orders, I have the ability to come in here and specify what I want to have happen. So I was able to build a query. And within that query, again, you can see I'm using the saved query from SAP. So again, this is just a regular SAP query. We came in here and we said we wanted to find all the sales orders that are for Amazon. So again, you can see here, this is just a query. And the key that makes this one work and be specific for the Amazon is that I said it needed to be a sales order that was approved, open, and for my customer, Amazon. So C0002 is my Amazon customer. And that's going to give me a list of all of my Amazon customers. Now, you might be asking, why would I want to create a query to be able to identify my Amazon sales orders? And the reason is that I might have a different schedule for Amazon. So within Amazon here, you can see I want to really make sure that I release every 10 minutes. So if I'm getting a whole bunch of orders that I'm importing from Amazon, Amazon's got some pretty tight rules in terms of being able to ship and making sure that you give tracking numbers and those kinds of things. And if you don't, it can hurt your ability to sell on Amazon or even stop your ability to sell on Amazon. So I might want those releases to be more frequent than some of my other order origination points. So something that comes in from my website or that comes in from the phone or something else along those lines. So being able to isolate those sales orders and to be able to put them on their own schedule is going to be pretty useful for me. And in addition to that, I can also say that I want to use the rules. So I want to release the line if it's 100% available. I don't want to partially ship an item. I can partially ship an order, but not an item. And then I can put in some filters. And we'll take a look at some of the filters in here as we go to the next example. Now, the next example that we have is going to be identifying the orders that are going to be shipped complete. So we'll take a look at that. Okay, and again, you can see this is based on a query. I want to pick this on a schedule where it's going to be less frequent than the Amazon. So you can see I'm doing that every 2 hours. My query here is basically the same query. So I was able to copy and paste the query, but I changed my where clause, and that makes the whole logic completely different. So if I come in here and I take a look at my where clause, you can see here it's now an approved order that's open, but it also has to be where the allow partial shipment is set to no, which means that it must ship complete. So when that happens, these sales orders will go out, okay? And again, the reason that I have this one separated is going to be that if I take a look at my pick action here, I'm only going to release this sales order. It should have been if the document was 100% complete. I must have selected the wrong one. So I apologize about that. So the idea here is that I now have orders that can only ship complete. I don't want to have multiple pick lists because SAP allows me to be able to have multiple pick lists. But I want to make sure that I'm restricting that based on my query rules so that I only get one pick list, that I only ship everything when I have everything. And so the system will monitor to be able to see that. And then another one that's really great, particularly if you or your customer is like an e-commerce shipper or something else like that, is being able to use special allocation rules. So here you can see I have single item, single unit, and what this query is going to do, if I come in here and I take a look at this query, so this is going to be my single item, single unit query. Most of the query is the same, except here I did a situation where I wanted to find only sales orders that had one row, okay, and the quantity was only one, okay. So I was able to do both that in a where clause and a having clause. A having clause, since I haven't explained that before, is basically the same as a where clause, but it's where you have to do it on something that's already been summarized. So if it's part of a summary operation, you do it in the having section. And the business logic behind this is that if I'm ordering T-shirts or you know, iPhone cases or whatever it is, okay, as long as it's not serialized, and even if it is serialized, doesn't really matter. But the point is that which unit I get doesn't matter. So if I have 50 customers that ordered the same, T-shirt or hat or whatever, okay, rather than going and picking them by sales order or anything else, I can go and I can change where I want to pick them from and how I want to pick them. Okay, so if we take a look at my pick action rule, okay, I'm now able to filter just from a particular zone in my warehouse. So I want to take them from my fast moving items zone, okay? And when I created my pick list generation rules, I grouped them not by order or by customer, but by item. Because I just want to go grab, if I've got 50 that I have to ship, I just want to go grab 50 of them and bring them to my shipping area. Because when I get to my shipping area, I can print out the 50 labels and apply them to any of the units because they're all the same. So it's able to really make it faster and easier for you to be able to get product out the door, make it more efficient, save labor costs, do all of those different kinds of functions. So you can see where SAP's Pick Back Manager is a great tool, and using SAP's Pick Lists is a great tool. By using the queries, you're able to add logic to be able to control when, to control where, and to control how your picks are going to be released in your warehouse. So I think that's a pretty cool use of queries. Again, I'm just going to try to pick up the pace here a little bit, and we'll move into lesson 5. And so you can take a look at that. Now, lesson 5 is basically talking about being able to decide how you want to be able to buy your products. And I already showed a simpler example where we could just simply say, okay, we're below minimum and we need to run MRP. But in this case, I'm going to use the Resolve Inventory Planning. And in the Resolve Inventory Planning, you'll see that we already have the ability to use several built-in formulas. So let me just go ahead and quickly take a look at the inventory planning, and I'll explain just very briefly what it is so that you can understand why adding a formula to it, a query, can be so powerful. Okay, so what this is giving me the ability to do is on an item warehouse basis to be able to control how much I'm going to buy, make, or transfer, very similar to some of the features that are in SAP. And I can use forecasts, also similar to the base SAP functionality. But when I build the forecasts in here, you can see that I have several forecast formulas. Now, everything from the 6-month rolling average through the weighted average here, these are all built in, and these are all based on well-established formulas that are published by gurus like Gordon Graham or John Schreibfeder from Effective Inventory Management that are used within SAP Business One, and of course, many other ERP systems as well. But what you'll often find is that when you go and get into the details, usually the purchasing manager has come up with some variation of the formula or their own complete formula that's distinct to them that they want to be able to use. So rather than forcing them into a model that was prescribed by the authors, you are going to give them the ability to be able to control the rules. And so once you do that and you create this custom formula, so again, if we scroll up to the setup here, you can use these to build your own custom formulas. And so you can build something simple like a 5% growth, or you can build something very complex, which is what I have here. And what the reason this one is, you can see it's a very long query. The reason it's as complex as it is this was a sample that we built for one of our customers, and in this particular example, what wound up happening is they wanted to be able to use calculated data to be able to predict the next number. So we're starting with known data. So I'm starting with, okay, next month's forecast is going to be based on the last 3 months usage using their own method. So they wanted to use a weighting for the different months. But then as we move forward into the future forecast periods, we want to be able to use some of the forecasts that we already created that are not yet saved into the formula. So as you can see, queries can get to be as complex as you need them to be, where you can actually go ahead and make multiple joins and multiple results and so on and so forth. But you can start with a simple query or a complex query. But ultimately, what this is going to do is it's going to use this usage data here. So if I take a look at my forecasts, you can see these forecast numbers are calculated based on the formula. And now I'm using that formula that was chosen based on that. So if I was to come in here and change, last months from 36 to, let's say, 50, okay, and update that, then now if I was to come in here and do my reset demand, you can see that these numbers will update. Okay, and it was able to reforecast going all the way out into the future dynamically by using the custom logic that that particular customer wanted to use. So again, you are able to use those queries to be able to kind of manipulate the data and work with your inventory planning. Similarly, we're going to go into lesson 5, and in lesson 6 rather. We're going to talk about using the ability to interact with external parties. So this is being able to move data back and forth between EDI and also with an e-commerce system or a third-party logistics warehouse and outsourced warehouse. And so we'll take a look at those two modules in here. But again, this logic can be generalized as well. And so within that, let's go ahead and take a look at a simple example. So if I go into my EDI and I want to take a look at my EDI export, okay? So when I'm sending data out by EDI, you have the ability to go in and do a mapping, of course. There's going to be rules that are associated with your EDI transaction partner. But that mapping, instead of making it so complex, I might want to have a situation where I'm going to instead send the data based on a query here. So inside of SAP Business One, when we enter a sales, an AR invoice, for example, okay, maybe they want to know who the salesperson is, but SAP doesn't store the salesperson on the AR invoice. It stores the salesperson code, that internal number that we talked about before. So here you can see you have the ability to create an example where you can come in here and choose the field from the AR invoice that you want to replace the data, and then you can use a query to be able to dynamically replace data. So I'm going to take the salesperson's name from the salesperson's table, where the salesperson's code is equal to the code that's on the invoice. And then here you can see I'm filtering it by the document number for the transaction that I am submitting. So you can see I have the ability to do this for the import and the export, as well as being able to manipulate data for individual transactions that come in. So if we take a look at incoming transactions in the EDI control, you can see if I look at my customer configuration. Now for this, just as a general rule of thumb, queries are quite powerful. There is a type of query called an update query, which you can see here. SAP does support the use of an update query, which means it's going to write data directly into a table, field and table, but only for user-defined fields. So please do not ever use queries to update a standard SAP Business One field. That should always be done through the SDK or the DI API or the service layer. But if you are using user-defined fields, you can go ahead and you can update these so that if we're importing orders that are coming in from a trading partner or from the web or for something else like that, you have the ability to go ahead and set rules such as free freight or other kinds of things based on the queries. And you can see I did it at the header level or at the row level. So at the row level, one of the common things is to be able to put in the country of origin, because when I go to ship, I need to be able to specify what the country of origin is going to be. And so in that regards, I'm able to automate that process again by using a query. And then last, and Tim, I'll open it up for questions. But the last one here was just again with your 3PL. It was the same kind of concept here. 3PL allows you to import and export sales orders, purchase orders, item masters, and so on and so forth to an outside warehouse. And so in that example, besides just manipulating the data, I wanted to be able to limit which data was being sent. And so if we take a look at the 3PL configuration here, and I take a look, let's say just at the export configuration, and we'll go to the sales orders here. Oh, sorry, it was the business partners that I limited it on. The ability to say that I don't want to send leads, I just want to send existing customers. So you can see I was able to specify that here. Or again, same kind of concept like we did with the EDI, where I want to send the salesperson's name and not their code. So as you can see, you have the ability to use the queries to substitute data or to be able to limit record sets, approvals, and so on and so forth. So I hope everybody enjoyed the training. At this point, I'll turn it over to Tim to open up for any questions that might be available from the audience. Shannon, if we're still muted.
Well, there we go. I'm sorry about that. Darryl, can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank you, Tim.
All right. Sorry about that. So we are going to have another 10 or 15 minutes just for Q&A. I know we ran late. Probably a lot of content that we try to cover in only 90 minutes, so we did extend it. We're not going to unmute because of the background noises, but if you do have any questions, you can post it in the chat box, and Darryl will read them and reply. And if you are going to be dropping off, we do appreciate you taking time today to attend the session. We will be making this recording as well as the PowerPoint available by the end of the day tomorrow. And as a follow-up, we do have our next online expert training session. Darryl, if you just pop that open on the
Yep.
PowerPoint. We have that in late October. Where are we here? There's all the queries. So we're going to have our next session is going to be Understanding Business One's Costing and Pricing. As you're all aware, over the last several releases, SAP has added a lot of functionality to the BP pricing programs. So we're going to be going through that in detail. We're also going to be covering, for those customers that are using the Resolve Suite, the advanced customer pricing module that we have available, which provides capability to things like aggregate pricing, ship-to pricing, and other advanced pricing functionality in conjunction with SAP's pricing. So let's see if we have any questions. If you have any, type them now, and then
Yeah,
we'll answer.
Yes, you can. So the first question came in and it said, is there a way to be able to add a query shortcut onto my cockpit and or dashboard? So let me just go ahead and exit out of this. There's a couple of different ways that you can do it. One is that if you build a query and build a widget, so again, that was going to be under Tools, Cockpit, and then Count Widgets. That's going to be able to give it to where you have the ability to take one of the queries that you've saved and then put it into your cockpit. So again, that's going to allow you to come in here and add any of your queries that you've built in here as a counter. So here's my business count objects, and you can see here's one that I didn't put on before, but the items with no commitment. So I can save that and put that on my query on my cockpit, and now see that query here. So that's one way that you can launch it. Another way that you can do it, which is kind of nice, is using that launcher tool that we were talking about, where within Launcher, if you take a query, and it can be any query, You can grab the query. So I'll just grab this inventory query, inventory aging, for example. And what I can do is I can add it to an SAP Business One menu. So if I wanted to put it under, let's say, inventory menu, and I want to call it my inventory aging, you can do that, and it will. Oh, sorry, this one already exists. But what it will do is it will make it so that it shows up on your main menu. And then once you've put it on your main menu, then you can also drag it into your common functions to be able to make it as a shortcut. So both of those are available. We got another question in here, which is, can my company still perform KPIs without resolve? Yes, all of the KPI functions are a standard SAP Business One function, provided that you are running HANA. There is some cockpit functionality available for the SQL version, but I don't believe that it gives you the ability to do the pervasive analytics. So that's a HANA function provided by SAP Business One.
Okay, if there's no more questions, again, thank you all for attending and staying for the entire session. Again, as mentioned, we'll have the content available and sent to all attendees by the end of the day tomorrow. And look forward to our next session next month.